Curious Now with Jenny Rudolph. A social scientist takes on the hidden structures that shape our behavior, communication, culture, and learning. Underneath the surface of intelligent, capable people who care about doing their best are hidden patterns that interfere with how they perform. Hierarchy, ego, communication glitches, resilience, power, professional learning all flow downstream into creating actions that work and actions that don't. Whether trying to figure out a tricky diagnosis, discovering what a learner is thinking, or upping your own clinical mastery, getting curious now is the solution.
We get into arguments at work because we are each appealing to different standards, and we don't even know the standard to which we are appealing, and we certainly don't know the standard the other person is holding. The power and the energy and the heat is coming from a standard on both sides, neither of which has been articulated. Welcome back to Curious Now from the Center for Medical Simulation. I'm Jenny Rudolph. Last week, we focused on making friends with your judgments. We suggested an exercise for you of mental noting, practicing keeping a running tally of the number of times you judged or the patterns of those judgments. We asked you to also avoid throwing a second dart at yourself, which is judging your judging. This week, we're going to pivot to trying to figure out why are we judging? And one part of that is, what are the hidden standards behind our judgments? Last week, I talked about myself walking through Harvard Square, judging everybody's outfit. That one was dorky. That one wasn't fashionable. That one was too tight. That one was too loose. What were they thinking? And I got to the end of 3 blocks and was amazed at how many judgments I had about people's attire. So the fact that I have those judgments reveals to me indirectly that I have a standard of what is the proper way to dress. And so when I say that's dorky, I must have some standard of what is not dorky. So potentially a schlubby shirt with a pen protector in your pocket, or ill-fitting pants, or not very cool sneakers, that would all be dorky. Versus somebody who uses a little flair, a la one of the fashion magazines, maybe not at that level, but that's the kind of thing that I implicitly have going. Of course, my kids, they of course think I dress extremely dorkily, revealing that they have a different set of judgments about clothes. So today, what we're going to think about is, what are those standards? How do we get at those standards? I first realized how important this was when my mentor, Diana McLean Smith, whose book, The Elephant in the Room, talks a lot about how we get into arguments at work because we are each appealing to different standards, and we don't even know the standard to which we are appealing, and we certainly don't know the standard the other person is holding. And so there's this heated argument, and there's this sort of mysterious, uncontrollable, difficult quality to it, because the power and the energy and the heat is coming from a standard on both sides, neither of which has been articulated. So building the muscle of starting to get a sense of, why do I even care about this, is important. How do we discover our standards? Here's an example. Clinical educators I work with often tell me a story like this. I asked the resident to call me if the labs were unusual, and the resident didn't call me. Part of what's going on here is, what is my standard for unusual labs? What's the resident's standard for unusual labs? We might have different standards and we don't even know it. So that's why we have to start doing a little detective work to clarify what our own standards might be. Another really excellent way to discover your standards is the pathway suggested by Bob Keegan and Lisa Leahy in their work on how do we change ourselves. What they noticed is when we complain about something, oh my God, that resident didn't call me. Oh my goodness, those clothes are so dorky. We are revealing a standard that we hold, a commitment to a certain standard. And the complaint is because the other person didn't meet that standard. So it's not always easy to know what your standards are, but what you can notice is when you judge, when you complain, those are a way to follow the trail to what is your standard. Notice when you judge, notice when you think someone else has made a mistake, notice when you complain, and ask yourself, what is the standard that has been disregarded or flouted? What's not being done right according to you? So, what's the workout of the week this week? Your workout is notice when you judge and use that as a portal to trying to figure out what's the standard behind it. Feel free to email us at curiousnow@harvardmedsim.org with your discoveries. So curious to hear, what are the standards you find?
Hey out there, this is James. I am the producer of Curious Now. You may hear from me occasionally throughout these episodes. As we have our weekly exercises, we're going to be bringing in listeners and friends of the program. We'll hear a little bit now from Jenny and a couple of simulation experts about what last week's exercise was like for them. So without further ado.
Welcome back to Curious Now. I'm Jenny Rudolph at the Center for Medical Simulation. And I'm really excited this week because we have some guests with us who have been trying our workouts of the week, which is really kind of where the rubber meets the road. And we'll have Laura Klenke-Borgman and Colleen Donovan. And I'm going to invite you ladies to introduce yourselves. Laura?
All right. Well, hello. Thanks so much for having me here today. I'm excited. I am currently the Director of Simulation Education at the University of Kansas School of Nursing, where I work with both undergrad and graduate nursing students in simulation-based training and learning.
And Colleen?
My name's Colleen Donovan. I'm an emergency medicine physician, and I am the simulation director at Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical School in New Jersey.
Welcome, Colleen. So one of the things I've been thinking about is, how do we bring the mindsets and skills that we use in simulation? Laura and Colleen, I'd love to just start with some reactions about our workout of the week from week one, which was just noticing your judging. What was that like for you?
Well, I can honestly say it was just really helpful for me to be able to call it out and label it to myself when I was doing it. I think even just doing that small task really did help me kind of wrap my head around what I was doing and when I was doing it.
I agree with that. I also was I was excited to point out things to myself, to be like, oh, here comes a thought. That's an interesting thought.
I shared a little bit about how kind of shocked I was about how much I judged and how often I judged. And Laura, you were saying it was helpful to you to notice that pattern.
The things that were noticing that I was judging about were things like specifically communication and communication styles and following instructions. And I noticed that just within my own teaching and with students, that what I was noticing was that there was a judgment when there wasn't a value placed on clear communication or doing clear communication. And that was definitely something that now that I look back at myself and my patterns, that makes perfect sense, that lines up.
So I'm imagining something like somebody saying something, it makes no sense, and a little thought bubble is floating up.
Yes.
With Laura's opinion of that.
Right.
So I, once again, agree with Laura. I have a little bit of a different lens or frame. I was using my kind of day-to-day experience, and I found myself doing a lot of this while I was driving. I think it gets to the same points that Laura was just talking about because, when we drive, you really do have to try to clearly communicate with the other people around you so that you don't cause an accident or nearly cause an accident. But I also had some strong reactions that went along with those thoughts
Uh-huh.
that often frequently also went with a horn.
What was the process of mental noting like for you, Colleen, as you noticed those driving reactions?
So what I had done was kind of that here comes a thought, like, wow, that's a strong thought that I just had. I'm activated by that. Why am I activated by that?
So two things are happening. You're like noticing it, that's a strong thought, and then you're sort of going to, why am I activated? Listening to you both, what I'm aware of is the things that you are judging are appearing in your narrative, like poor communication or not a clear pathway for the team or how the other person's driving. And Colleen, you said the arising of that, insight of that's a strong thought. I think part of what's a little unusual, or I might even say abnormal about this practice is we kind of have to step outside the content and bystand and observe I call it the playlist of judgments that come up for me. That playlist, Laura, what does it look like?
A constant thought that happens a lot is like, it doesn't necessarily have to be this hard. It could be easier than this. It could be more efficient than this. I think that's the playlist that plays in my head with that lack of communication or a bunch of different communicators going in the different directions is frustration with knowing it doesn't have to be like this and it could be easier.
Yeah. And Colleen, if you were to characterize a playlist, what kinds of things are on it?
A lot of the time, before I could put a name to the thing that I felt it.
Mm.
So there was like a icky feeling, or like my body got tight, crunched down on my teeth, or like I had like a physical reaction to some of these thoughts. But that happened first before I, was doing this exercise and was like, that's a physical reaction to that thought.
I was just going to completely agree with that. Why this exercise was really good for me, have like an emotional, physical response before I actually allow myself that time to process the why and calling it and naming it something. I think that happens to me a lot, that those things happen in reverse, that I have this immediate reaction and then I have to stop and think, why am I having that reaction? So this mental noting, this exercise was really helpful for me to kind of break that cycle of like, before I immediately have a physical reaction, let's name it, let's notice it, let's call it out.
Identifying that I had that physical reaction made me pull back a little bit to do that thing, Jenny, that you suggested, of like where you have to step back outside of that for a minute. Because when you feel it, you are in it and it is very active and engaged. I got this very angry thing that I would not have identified if I hadn't stepped back a little bit and allowed myself to name it and then cool down a little.
Part of the reason I recommended this to myself and others as a workout of the week is I've just found it so freeing and relaxing over time to not be owned by these reactions.
That moment of mental noting allowed me to step back from that feeling and be like, is this worth that energy?
It almost allows me a little bit of like permission of, I think sometimes when I have a negative reaction or I have a negative emotion, there's like a lot of sometimes like shame that goes with it. Like, stop that, quit feeling that way, quit it, stop. Right. And so sometimes if I can just name it and call it something, it's like, okay, you feel that way because you feel that way and you got to let yourself feel that way. But then what are we going to do about it? And so I think for me, it almost gives being able to sort of make that mental note and make that mental label I felt like a little off the hook a little bit of like giving me permission. And now I've got some room and space to like figure out what I'm going to do with it.